Thank you, Suzette. And I've been looking forward to this topic. Too loud, too quiet, is that all right? I've been looking forward to this topic for probably 10, 11 months now, since it was put on the agenda for this year. And so I really appreciate the leadership of TMA that we're really able to sense the winds of what was coming out of, the fresh winds coming out of downtown. And after, 3 or 4 years, maybe more, of this alliance blossoming, I think this is the first time that we've, as a group, tackled the topic of downtown revitalization, maybe because for the first time in a while, we have something to tackle. So I'm really excited about this time, and my role for the next 10 minutes is to give a quick overview of some of the positive things that are happening out of downtown that we can get excited about. I will not be able to give the 30-year history of what has transpired since a few people back in the 80s and 90s said, let's revitalize and grow downtown, and did tax things. I'm not going to try to say over the next 10 minutes either that everything is going well, because that would be foolish, right? There are some great things on the horizon, but wisdom and knowing and understanding is important to make sure that we keep that momentum going. So I will try not to be the blatant optimist that I'm often accused of and am guilty of, but I am excited as a downtown resident and someone who is in love with this city and is just short of buying my burial plot, as Randy Reynolds likes to say, in this town. If God keeps me here for 40 years, I am all in on that and excited about it. So we're just going to look at a couple of exciting things and then lead into a panel who are going to take us the rest of the way home, who represent a diverse array of sectors and ages and generations and experiences in downtown. We can go back one quick slide. Here's where we want to start this morning. Our city is at a tipping point. It's happening out of downtown. And then the question that we want to ask, and probably won't get to answer, but we should ask anyway, is will we be there and will everyone flourish? For the church, those are two vital questions, and that's going to be our springboard. But we have to address this on the next slide. When we think of downtown, the champions of the faith that are in this room probably are thinking a lot about what has happened when it comes to these three things. Transients, young brain drain. We heard in 2014 that a study was done that only 18% of U of A graduates actually stay in the city once they graduate. 82% take off. And so downtown Tucson is known for transients and young brain drain. We also think of mismanagement. We think of the millions of misspent dollars through Rio Nuevo, which did happen. A different story is being told, but this is what we think of when we think of downtown. It was first run by the city of Tucson, and then it was taken over in 2010 by a state legislature-run board because millions of dollars were misspent. And believe it or not, Rio Nuevo today is something that we all should be really proud of. It's growth-driven. It's opportunity-minded, it is incredibly transparent, and it is investing small amounts of money to get huge results. So some praises there. And then we also hear about obstruction. We hear about the non-business friendly policies that push companies away and don't bring those in. And it would be improper to ignore that was the case. The opportunity for that to be the case in the future is there, just as the opportunity is for that story to change. But where we sit today, that story is changing. Those three things that come to mind when we think of downtown are shifting dramatically at this very moment. And if we'll go to the next slide, we can kind of see where that started. We've laughed at this little beauty. We've made fun of it. We've joked about it. But one of our loved dearly in this alliance is Mayor Walkup. This is his fault. I'm just kidding. Mayor, in a good way. There wasn't just one person, it was many, but Mayor Walkup was an advocate for this streetcar. And what he said was that our university is landlocked. We've got to revitalize our downtown. We've got to connect our students with our downtown so that can flip some of our transients. If we can connect new business opportunities with students graduating, maybe we can see a shift in our city. In fact, he is known to have said that it's a critical component to downtown revitalization. It'll strengthen that partnership between the University of Arizona and the region. And here's his quote, and holds the promise of cranes in the sky. And that would be prophetic if He wasn't a very intelligent leader of our city that just knew what was working really well in other cities around the country. When you have a revitalizing downtown connected to an intellectual base, you can do it successfully, your city thrives. Mayor Walkup knew that. The streetcar had 1 million riders by its 11 months of opening, and it's driving development because here's the thing: the route doesn't change. It's a simple 4-mile route, west side of the freeway, downtown, and to the U of A. It's driven an economic impact of close to $1 billion of public and private investment, as companies and businesses have said there is a steady stream of traffic that isn't going to go anywhere for a while, driving between the U of A and the west side of the freeway. We're going to invest. And if you go to the next slide, here's the prophetic part of Mayor Walkup's cranes in the sky. I took this picture. There's a crane in the sky, and there's the streetcar. That picture there is of about a week ago of the new AC Marriott, Tucson Marriott Hotel going up. It's the first downtown hotel in 50 years, and the developer is crediting huge support and investment from Rio Nuevo, the development board, and the Bank of Tucson. In fact, I could show you by the exact page this developer's quote saying, "I could not be here doing this if it weren't for the Bank of Tucson. Other people told me no, and the powers that be in this city said yes, and so here I am." And in fact, this developer is also very active on a 4-block area. And one of his other creations in the city, besides this hotel, is this next slide. I don't know, maybe the lights off would make it easier to see, but this is about a 2-year-old co-working space in the core of our downtown called Connect Co-working. It is home to over 100 freelancers, businesses, startups, and nonprofits, and some of us in this room, would you believe it or not, who said we want to go down to our urban core and work together at this desk space and be creative together for the kingdom in the marketplace. And so that was the City Connect initiative that you heard about. It's 14,000 square feet. It's the largest of its kind in all of Arizona. And it is driving business and entrepreneurship and creativity. We can go to the next slide. On the other side of the freeway, maybe you've heard about West Side development. Maybe you've heard the word Mercado. So those are two of the same things at this stage. Mercado is being expanded, again, thanks to Rio Nuevo's support. It'll be expanded to be a 20,000 square foot retail complex. If you can change the slide, here's another view of it. That will house about 16 local and regional businesses within the next couple years. It's next to Caterpillar's new headquarters, west of the 10. And so for a lot of us, getting Caterpillar to move its headquarters into the city was a huge win. In fact, Rio Nuevo gave a $2 million, I don't want to say donation, but a $2 million investment to support moving costs, to move Caterpillar's headquarters into downtown, and $50 million to build a facility on a 25-year lease to bring all of Caterpillar's headquarters here because they liked the University of Arizona and they liked the mining here. And so there's some exciting developments going on there. There will be multiple mixed-use residential developments that are also in the works. In fact, there are 22 of those that are either being built, in the works, or being hoped to start building soon in the downtown area. Again, that's because developers are getting excited about the streetcar, excited about this route that can bring people in and around their businesses, and so they're wanting to come in and build. Here's why. 97% of living downtown is full. There's only 3% availability if you want to live downtown. We need more opportunities because we're finding that both older and younger individuals in our city are wanting to move into the core of it, and there's no room for them to go. That's exciting. And then let's go back to that transients one, maybe the one that I'm really excited about. This is a picture that I took of a magazine that highlighted that Tucson was ranked by Time magazine as a top 5 city for millennials. They talked about it because of our revitalizing downtown, our ethnic restaurants and culture, our history, our cost of living. The population of our locals, age 20 through 34, is a considerable 25%. That's a fantastic number. Career opportunities are a big draw in the city, with some metrics pointing to 11% job growth over the next 5 years. And so if you're a young person with an idea, you can come here and live without having to make a massive salary. There is nature and ethnic opportunities. The culture is diverse. And so right next to the Seattles and the Austins of our country, there was Tucson as a top 5 city for millennials. That's right. That is good news. But, and this is a small but today, there's another side to this coin that is for the church to consider. You go to the next picture. This picture is a picture of a word that cities 10 years ahead of us know to be gentrification. Here's the tension that our city faces, and here's why the church needs to be a part of it. There's a simple formula that other cities that are beyond us have figured out. Revitalization equals retention. Cities thrive when there are opportunities for smart, talented, driven, opportunistic people to come into a city and live. For Tucson to thrive, for Tucson to be Tucson, we need what's happening in downtown. We need revitalization. We need spaces like Connect Co-working for smart people to come in and work and create. We need that streetcar to the U of A. But here's the problem we can't get away from. When that happens, the marginalized become more marginalized. And that's socioeconomic, that's ethnic, that's cultural. That's the tension that Tucson faces. But here's the cool part. Tucson, us, we here have the opportunity to write a different story that has the opportunity to cast a plan and a strategy for other cities after us to figure out how we create a thriving city where everybody flourishes. We can't get away from that here in Tucson. And if this moment, this day, if we tackle that topic, Tucson for the next 20, 30, 40 years has the opportunity to be a place that is a blueprint for the rest of the country when it comes to a thriving, just, and flourishing city. And I see heads nodding in the room who are living downtown. I'm not being just a great speaker when I say that time is now. Because there are people that are in Portland that we're connected to who are 10 years ahead of us, and they're saying, guys, you're almost there. You are where Portland was, where Austin was 10, 15 years ago. And now we are struggling with the marginalized becoming even more marginalized. We're successful, we're known, we're pumping out talent, we're thriving by some metrics, but we're not a just city. And so here we are in Tucson, having put 5, 7 years in together in this kind of a space. Now we have the job of creating a thriving city that is flourishing for all. And that's the last slide of this intro. It's going to start becoming really hard for us as passionate Christ followers in the city to say that we are for the city if we are not engaged, invested spiritually, financially, and personally in the downtown core. If we keep telling ourselves the story that we've told for the past 10, 15, 20 years, if we remain disengaged, uninvested, and discouraged about our urban core, it will move on without us, and then we will be stuck picking up the pieces at the end. Because that's what the church is doing in these other places. They weren't around the table designing, creating, innovating. They have to pick up the pieces of broken communities that for some is thriving, and for many is not. And that's the story that we get to cast, that we get to figure out, that we get to shape from this moment forward. And to that end, that's why we wanted to have a panel today. It's going to be a diverse panel of ages, backgrounds, sectors in our city, ethnicities, and they all bring with them a special view of the city. One is a young person who left the city and came back. He represents one of many young people over the last 2 years especially who God has called to come back into this city and to put down roots and be here long term for the flourishing of this city. You're going to hear from a business owner who both lives and works downtown, who is seeing her business thriving and is committed to this city and is excited and pressing forward the good that is happening in our city. You're going to hear from someone who moved into the downtown core a few years ago and is now working to make our streets and our community livable, walkable, and enjoyable. And you're going to hear from a pastor who understands deeply what it means to often be a part of a community that doesn't get the great end of the justice stick. And how do we as ministries get ahead of that gentrification curve and be places where all of us, all our different ethnicities and our backgrounds can flourish. So that's where we're going to go today. And at this point, I'd love to welcome up our panel, who you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of in a few minutes. That's going to be Andrew, Colby, Laura, and Demond. I don't. Here you go, Andrew.
Hello?
There we go. He figured it out. All right. I'm going to move this here real quick. So this isn't going to be a scattershot type of style of panel. We're actually going to work our way down. We're going to start with Andrew. He has a few questions coming to him, a few minutes to answer, and then we'll just keep going down the line, and then Pastor Demond will close us out. So the first question, Andrew, you were the guy I was talking about who was here in the city. I think you went to the U of A, decided to leave, and then came back. Walk us through that timeline. What brought you here? What went through your heart and mind when God started to draw you back here?
Yeah, so a little bit of background. I grew up in Phoenix, came down here for school, really as a last resort. I had applied elsewhere, didn't get in anywhere else. So came to the U of A for 4 years. Like that's why I came to Tucson. And then following the plan really well, I left as soon as shortly after graduating, and went up to Phoenix, did a church internship, kind of explored that option, whether or not God was calling me to that. And after that had ended, was contemplating, like, okay, I've almost got this clean slate of being able to set any course that I wanted to, being able to follow any direction that I wanted to. And probably more so than any other time in my life, I felt a specific calling to a specific place. And I'd love to say, just to feed into this conversation, I'd love to be able to say that it was out of this sort of ambitious appreciation for what Tucson is and what Tucson meant for me. But realistically, like, my time here as a student I was a student, I was a young life leader, and beyond that, very little else. And so there was a sense of calling that was sort of without rationale. But after having got here, after knowing I was supposed to be here because of God's appointment in that, I think the important part was I was able to discover Tucson. Rather than coming in with all these preconceptions, I was able to see the city with fresh eyes.
Very cool. Tang and I have a lot in common. I think when we go to the same church, we're at a church plant in downtown Tucson that just celebrated its 2-year anniversary, and then Tang also co-facilitates with a few of us the City Connect venture downtown to get ministries to co-work together, and does a variety of many other things. He's a talented guy here. So with all of that background, are you seeing other young people coming back into the heart of the city, and is it more dramatic than it used to be? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, going along with, I think the mentality that I had going into school was pretty common, and you even mentioned a more specific statistic about that, of people come to go to the U of A, or they're raised here, they go to the U of A, and then the plans to say goodbye, find something better. And I think, to answer your question, yes, see lots of young professionals, people sticking around, but again, sort of following my trend, I think these young individuals that are either planning on coming back or planning on staying is because they're realizing it's actually an option, because they're noticing, rediscovering the city in ways that are actually appealing, that you don't necessarily get from being raised in a home in Oro Valley, or being a student at the U of A and not venturing out beyond that. But yeah, people our age that are able to experience the city for all that it is, both from downtown to the periphery around it. I see a trend of people falling in love with a place that maybe they've been for 5-10 years already and just didn't have that.
That's great. What excites you, maybe in 30 seconds, what excites you about ministry and work in downtown Tucson?
For ministry, I'm a member of Redemption Church, and we have the weird problem of trying to get older. We have too many young people, which it's just, yeah, it's a weird sort of dynamic. And so wrestling with that and figuring out how do we get older, cool problem to have. And then I also work at a restaurant downtown, Christian business-owned restaurant, Thai restaurant, and being able to see the connection between Christian mentality in the heart of a city, being able to do both outreach and just influence that neighborhood.
That's great. I know this is an issue that's really dear on your heart, and there's a lot of leadership growing downtown of pastors and leaders who are starting to see the winds of this gentrification question. Some flourish, some don't. How do we reverse that? As downtown continues to grow and the trend looks like it's going to continue that way, what can we individually and then as the church, what do you think we can do the next 3 to 5 years to really set the stage for a flourishing city?
Gentrification is a really big issue. It's a really big word. I have trouble saying it sometimes, but really big issue that I feel like these guys will be able to handle a lot better, speak into a lot more. I will say 2 things come to mind really practically, individually. Consider downtown as an option for when you're taking your family out to eat, or when you're going on a date night with your spouse, or when you're looking for something to do in the weekend. I think even in this conversation, revitalization, it comes with the assumption that downtown was once dead. It needed to be revitalized. And honestly, I think that's true. So if you haven't been down there in a while, come see what's happening. Come see the new life that's happening there. And then secondly, I had trouble just thinking about this because we've got ministries all across the city, and why should I prioritize this place that's 20 miles away from my church or from my house? Maybe that's not the case, but with all that's been presented and seeing how important downtown is, figure out a way, whether it's through mentoring a young professional or through financially supporting a Christian organization or startup that's happening there, recognize the importance of it and figure out one way that you can invest into it, even if it's from a distance. I wouldn't expect everyone to everyone's got to move and work downtown. Tucson is a whole city, and downtown's just a part of it, but it's an important part.
Excellent. That's a good time to do that. Our next panelist is Colby Henley. He's the bicycle program manager for Living Streets Alliance. It's a local nonprofit that works to make our streets safe and accessible to all users. He's intrigued by the concept of the parish and what it looks like to pour oneself into and tie one's fortunes to a specific, defined place. And I'm leaving out reading your last line of the bio you gave me because Colby's story is one that is really interesting to me. I really honor and respect Colby and Karen, his wife, for what they did when it wasn't cool to do it. And I think something that the church has to wrestle with, not just in Tucson, but around the country. The story about 25 years ago was that it was not cool to be urban, believe it or not. We all fled, quotations, we all fled nationwide to the suburbs. It was easier. There was more money. It was more comfortable. We all did it, so we can all bear that, not have to do it individually. But before it was cool to come back downtown, Colby and his wife sold his home in northwest Tucson and moved downtown to a place between downtown and the U of A. And so that's what you're going to get to hear in a minute here is a man and a woman dedicated to the heart of our city before it was cool to do so. So can you share your downtown story in a few minutes and what you're now doing with LSA?
Sure. So, yeah, as you spoke out, so Karen and I, about 7 years ago, found ourselves empty nesters and kind of wanted to really think about, we had a period of time left in our life. As you can see, I'm on the older end of the age spectrum on this panel. But so we found ourselves at that point of our life and wanted to really utilize that well and not kind of look up in 10 years and it's gone and not have anything to really show for it. So we felt called to come downtown and weren't really sure what that was. Ended up buying a home and moving into a neighborhood and really kind of bought into the concept of a parish, as Zach mentioned, and kind of identifying ourselves around a particular neighborhood that we live in and just pouring and investing into that place. And in doing that for me really personalized or just put some flesh to the faith things that I had talked about, often about loving my city and those things that were kind of vague and nebulous. But when I applied them to Rincon Heights neighborhood, and when I said love my neighbors, there were faces and particular people that meant, and places downtown that we would pray about and pray for particular buildings that are now being proposed for development. Just some amazing stories like that. So that's the experience that we had. And I think doing that is when I really learned to love Tucson as a city. I like parts of Tucson, things about Tucson, but I never really loved Tucson until we did that. Yeah.
That's great. Colby, in a few minutes, is actually going to lead our group in prayer, as we usually do, because Colby was one of the original 4 or 5 that were praying downtown before downtown was downtown. Brian Goodall, Mike Beer, Dave Goffney, these guys were doing prayer walks at night, in the morning, leading massive prayer initiatives. So Colby has the real benefit of getting to see the before and the after in some huge ways. What are 1 or 2 things, first of all, that most excite you about what you're seeing downtown between now and 7 years ago?
Sure. I think some things you mentioned about it, and just hearing your initial presentation, I got re-excited. It's neat to see that summarized and talked about. I think things that are very noticeable from just the time that we've been there are young people that are moving into downtown, investing, starting startups, entrepreneurship. That stuff is just, there's just all kinds of things happening. They're just popping all over the place. So we're really seeing momentum with that. That's exciting to me. Another thing that we're seeing kind of related to that are businesses and organizations, Christians that are seeing their workplace as part of their ministry, their mission, and it's not just evangelizing in their workplace, but they see that their work, how it influences the city, how it helps the city flourish, brings justice to the city. So I think I'm seeing that's starting to happen, and maybe some secular organizations and businesses, including mine, that are starting to, have a Christian that will come in and they start to recognize that the church is an entity in the city that they want to now engage with and see that we bring something to the table. So that's exciting to me.
That's excellent. There's another side of this coin that you are somebody that I look up to and learning from. I think you started helping me think about this topic more. We're not going to overuse the G word. We just can't give it any depth or quality here today. But you understand this tension that we ended the first part with. What do you see Tucson able to do to keep that energy going that you just talked about while making this a place where everyone gets to be a part of that energy? You've been a part of some studios and talks on this. So
we've brought some church folks together and had some stuttering starts to try to kind of have this in conversation. It's complex, it's hard. Other cities have struggled with it. I don't know about anyone that truly nails a good answer to it, but it's worth our effort to give it our best. So like you mentioned before, I think kind of 2 sectors. I see kind of an economic piece, that there are people that have lived in downtown and in the surrounding neighborhoods because that was the only place they could afford. And as that revitalizes and is redeveloped, that pricing point has changed. Some of the new housing downtown, we're talking 1-bedroom apartments for $1,500-$1,800 a month. So that's skewing the price point for a lot of those folks that have lived in places that now landlords say, well, I can redevelop this and make a whole lot more money. So you have to think about economic, so affordable housing built into these places, that it's always a component, those kind of things. So those are conversations. And then the second piece is cultural. So even beyond the money, there are neighborhoods and places and cultures downtown and around, artists, folks that have built cultures, ethnic communities that have built cultures, that we need to be really respectful of, that when we go in, that we take a humility, a listening posture, that we protect those and encourage those and invest in those, bring our resources to those folks, at the same time that we're doing the new development and bringing the young people from the U of A and all that. So make sure that we don't substitute one for the other, but that we protect that and encourage that as well.
Something that some people say that is unique and special about Tucson, there's one thing that might keep us from telling the same story that other cities have before us. And this one might surprise me, but it's beautiful. It's our diversity. Our Hispanic culture, our African American culture, our Indian culture. That is something that a lot of these other cities don't have. That not only do we have to appreciate and honor, but we have to rely and press into. Honoring our 4,000 years of being a valley under the, a land under the Black Mountain that natives grew from in the beginning. Maybe one of our big hopes to be in a city where everybody flourishes. So I love that you hit on that, Colby. It's not a burden. It is the exact thing that makes Tucson what Tucson needs to be. So amen to that. Going from that macro to one or two micro things, this is the last thing I wanted to get your thoughts on. What are one or two things that we could leave here today and start doing to get our feet wet, if we aren't already, in what is new happening downtown?
Sure. I think like David said, that coming to visit and just experience it, just to see, it has changed even, so we've been there 7 years and it's changed dramatically, but even in just the last 2 years, it has changed dramatically. So we're still discovering things. So stuff is just really happening. So spend some time and, like I say, just come to learn and listen and absorb. To me, that's probably the most important thing, is just to be there and to do that and to engage with it, to read about it and to understand, like you've mentioned, that what happens downtown. We often talk about that it's kind of the intersection of so much that's happening socioeconomic and culturally. There's a lot of overlap there. There's the U of A stuff. There's the business community. There's the government that makes a lot of policies. So there's a lot of overlap and interconnection about a lot of things that influence what happens citywide. So it's just important to pay attention to. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Colby. Let's give him a hand. I'm really excited about the opportunity to have Laura here. Laura was probably one of my first few faces when I started co-working down at Connect Co-working downtown a couple of years ago. I had rented a space on the bottom floor, but it wasn't finished yet. That's how new it was. And so they let me go up on the second floor, and they put me right next to Laura. And so I think we were the first interactions, the first conversations that I had. So you're really special in that way. But Laura also represents a successful businesswoman who is running a successful company, who can point to getting to be in a collaborative space downtown as a big reason for that. She lives downtown, is just a real core member of a lot of what is happening in the core of our city. So I'm really glad that you get to be here, and I don't think I told you much of that, but it's all true. And Laura believes that good stories have the power to change the world. So she named her company Storyteller Public Relations. Her work primarily centers around arts, culture, hospitality clients, using media outlets and event marketing to help clients establish a presence, strengthen a reputation, and build a brand. You grew up in Tucson, and any El Camino Baptist folks in the house? All right, so Laura grew up in El Camino Baptist Church and now attends Second Miles, so a tried and true Tucsonan over here. Share your Tucson story. We're going to do the PR thing now. We believe good stories have the power to change the world. Share your Tucson story, your work, what you're excited about. You live downtown. Why do you still live downtown? Go for it.
Yeah, I actually have to practice what I preach now. Usually I shove my clients in front of a camera or a stage to tell their story, and I get to be in the background. So this is a little bit of a little nervous here, but we're good. So I moved to Tucson in the mid-'90s. My dad worked for Hughes, so we were part of the Hughes migration to Tucson then. Definitely grew up here. Went to college at Biola University in California. From there, moved to New York. That's where I got my professional start, was working in book publishing out there, affecting culture in that way. And then moved back to Tucson at like 2009, beginning of 2009, which is kind of right when all of the downtown development, the actual construction of it really started to happen. I think a lot of the tax and incentivize and a lot of the planning had happened before that, but I really got to see storefronts begin to go up. Did not expect to stay in Tucson when I moved back from New York. I thought I might go back to another city, check out something on the West Coast. But I really, to quote you, Andrew, fell in love with Tucson. I really got involved with KXCI Community Radio, which is in Armory Park. It's a great station, and some other of the community stuff in Tucson, and downtown being a big part of it. So that's really what got me excited about staying here. And yeah, that's why I'm here in Tucson. Oh, I guess I can talk about the company a little bit.
From a business perspective,
Yeah.
it's starting to get a little bit easier, a little bit more fun to be in business. We just had 600 executives from Caterpillar commit to coming to Tucson with a $600 million impact on the city. Massive benefit. Talk about that transition and where you're at now, what you're excited about as a business owner.
Yeah, so again, my clients are mostly in the hospitality world. I work with Tucson Tamale Company. I'm doing PR for the hotel, actually, that Zach was talking about earlier. I work with the Arts Foundation in Tucson, which is working a lot right now with preserving affordable arts space downtown for Tucson. And I think all the development's really exciting. I think the restaurant and entertainment scene downtown has definitely flourished and done well. And you mentioned before about the residences downtown, but you both actually did. And as someone that's living downtown, I think that to me is one of the most exciting things. Downtown Tucson has been a destination and not quite as lived in as it could be. And so I think I don't want to see downtown Tucson become a Times Square where it doesn't feel lived in and authentic in that way. And so as it continues, it's been a residence for a lot of people for a long time, but as it continues to grow commercially, I want to see the growth of residences grow with that too, just to keep it feeling real and authentic.
That's great. What are some practical ways that we as Christians can begin to invest time, energy, and resources downtown?
Definitely spending your money at local businesses, and that isn't just downtown. I think that's anywhere in Tucson. You have no idea what a difference it makes to go to a locally owned restaurant or shop as opposed to Outback Steakhouse or something that's national. I mean, I know restaurants that over the course of a year, having 4 or 5 more people in a day can make or break them. So that's something to really keep in mind. I think practical ways for downtown, as someone who lives in downtown, the getting involved with homelessness and mental health issues, I think is something that the city, it's hard for them to have the capacity to really handle that. And so I think that's one really practical way that the church can come in and help downtown thrive.
That's great. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
Alrighty, and our closer today is Pastor DeMond Holt. And without looking, I'm going to try to get this right. He's the pastor of Pilgrim's Rest Missionary Baptist Church in South Tucson. I can go to sleep tonight. All right. He's also the president of the IMA, the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance. Man, this is good today. We're on a roll. This is going to be good, which is a gathering of African-American churches and ambassadors and ministries in our city. And fairly recently, in the scope of all that we're talking about, also the Justice Domain Director for Tucson. And it was just a blessing to have DeMond here to speak not only to this issue from a church perspective, but also from a justice perspective, encouraging us as ministry leaders in engaging the heart of our city, but whoever we are in the room, also speaking to how do we create a just community where everyone flourishes socioeconomically, culturally, and ethnically. So thank you, Pastor, for making it. I was so focused on getting those names right, let me pull up my questions. All right. As a pastor of a church located in the developing downtown and South Tucson general area, what are some things that are exciting you about the transformation that you're seeing?
Well, honestly, if we be very honest from a cultural viewpoint, especially dealing with justice, let me first say that from my view and my work, a lot of the work, when I think of downtown, I think of courts. I think of law enforcement agencies. I think of the county attorney's office, the city courts, justice courts, superior courts, legislation for our city council. And the reason why I say that is because from my perspective, many times when I go downtown, it's to deal with justice reform, deal with injustices and inequalities that take place downtown. Laura says something very intriguing, which is true. To a lot of the residents of Tucson, downtown is a drive-through type of demographic. Many people also doesn't see downtown as a place of residence, a place of living in, and a lot of our residents don't go to downtown unless they have to. So there's some different views of how we view downtown, and I'm just being very transparent and honest. When it comes from my point of view, it's dealing with more of the public sector and governmental and court situations and things like that. I am excited the fact that we do have opportunities to where doors are being open, to where it's inviting and being more inclusive. But as an African-American pastor, African-American president of a community organization and dealing with the community of color, you'll really be honest, if it had nothing to do with courts, have nothing to do with a U of A, you don't see that many minorities as far as African-Americans in the downtown area. The mindset is also, I want to stay away from downtown as much as possible because, again, we think of tickets, we think about just being real for a certain demographic that you just want to stay away from. But yeah, to get a broader view of being more inclusive, I'm excited about that but the socioeconomics is a big issue in our urban areas, in our inner cities. We hear a lot about why so many African Americans and poor Americans in Chicago getting shot. Some people say, oh, it's so easy to have law and order, get more police. No, Chicago has some of the more strict gun laws than any city in America, and yet, we're all the way in the thousands as far as people being shot. I know I left talking about downtown, but I'm making a point, is that you have to have social economics as well. You just can't just arrest your way into solutions. Same way with the homeless that we see in downtown. Law and order is the thing that we need to do. You have to have social economics, and you have to have our kids and different individuals also to have quality education, which is the key to breaking the cycle of poverty off of individuals, where when we have the mom and pop shops, when we have mom and pop entrepreneurs, the education will be there so that they can get hired and get back on their feet.
That's good. One of the fun experiences when my wife and I first moved into our house was walking along the street by Stand With Rosa and Black Lives Matter, right. And it was this very different vibe of I'm in a very diverse place, and I'm the new guy, I'm the minority, and the best place I can be is in a learning position. Right. The gentrification issue is that over the next 5 or 10 years, my neighbors of Hispanic and African American culture may not be there. Yeah. And so what can the church do to start inserting itself into that conversation now? How do we keep that from happening? How do we keep those diverse communities when often they get displaced when things flourish and grow?
Well, we have to get into the roots, especially when we're talking about the kingdom of God and we're talking about the body of Christ. Still to this day, Sunday is the most segregated day. And, like we're here together. I know Dave Drum come to the IMA, so I know what he feels like being the only white guy amongst blacks. So, amen, I'm the only black amongst so many Anglo. But, hey, we're all the body of Christ. But we need to be more inclusive and be more open-minded on our objective on reaching our communities. And at the end of the day, regardless of our skin color, we still bleed red, and people's hurt is still the same. It may come from different viewpoints, and we need to just be open and embrace our differences. Nationally, individuals from politics on down like to use our differences to separate us. And we got to realize that regardless, we have to put godly principles first. And one of those things is we need to outreach to everybody. Everybody in this room has an ingredient that the city needs. And it's just like chicken soup. Well, I mean, without seasoning, salt and garlic powder, and, you just don't have that flavor. So all of us have this wonderful flavor if we come together and really embrace our differences. And it's okay to disagree, but we don't have to be divided.
Mm-hmm. Amen. The last question for you to close us out, Pastor, is your church is pretty close to what we're seeing in downtown and the revitalization. How are you as a pastor and your ministry thinking ahead to South Tucson as a piece of Tucson close to downtown is itself revitalizing as well. South Tucsonans are investing heavily into their own place. They've been born, they've grown, they want to make it better. And so this question is not just a 2 or 3 mile radius, it's very much in your neck of the woods. So what have you in your ministry and your pastoral personal ministry been thinking about as far as planning for this growing movement the next 3, 4, 5 years?
A lot of it has to be a trajectory of what you're looking at as far as a short-term and long-term type of view. And so it's going to come back to my vision. And as a leader of my church, I have a 3-point vision. It's the 3E vision: evangelism, education, and economics. And so obviously evangelism, what does a man gain the whole world and he loses his soul? So the largest thing is your relationship with God first. And then so many opportunities opens when you have a foundation of God. And I'm going to be honest, I'm very unapologetically a Christian. So I don't apologize for my Christian views. Secondly, it's education. Again, I go back, that the people perish for a lack of knowledge, the scripture says. So we have to empower our people, especially our children, starting with a whole new generation, K through 12. Right now we're seeing in different school systems, a lot of our kids are failing in reading and math around 3rd and 4th grade education, which leads to potential high school dropouts. And if children are not in a supervised educational classroom setting, if you don't educate, you're going to have to incarcerate, which opens the door for incarceration. So education has to be a piece, and then the economics, really pushing, even in poor communities, and most definitely in the community of color, some families have never even seen college, let alone become an entrepreneur and take risk and open these doors. So what I've done, to answer your question, is really push education. It is very, very strong. Christian education, of course, you need to know the Word of God, but secular education to be able to open these doors. Secondly, the social and economics piece to get people to even have an idea of that $1 million dream or that American dream, and to take advantage of becoming an entrepreneur and taking some of those businesses into the downtown area to be successful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if we had another hour, which we don't worry, this is, I think, where we should land, maybe even next year, is that, again, not to get too technical, but the word that's starting to arise in communities around the country is self-gentrification. What would it look like if we invested in our homegrown youth and entrepreneurs and business starters? And what would that look like on a parish level, a church level, to say each of our churches are going to educate, invest financial, mentorship, education resources, grow people, young and old, out of our city that know the vibe, the culture, the essence of Tucson, who are going to be here long-term for the good of Tucson, not just to make a buck and come in from the outside. Not that those who come in from the outside are here just to make a buck, but that's the stereotype. So you're our closer for a reason. Thank you, Pastor DeMond. I think that's where we need to be thinking and going. So can you give a hand up for our panel? In a few minutes, Colby's going to lead us in prayer. let's maybe think about for the next 5 minutes, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, if you might be able to ask it a little bit loudly and direct it to a specific member of the panel. Is there anything that came to mind, a question about downtown or a thought about how to get involved, or something that you'd like the panel to speak into a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a group actually that I kind of tapped into and went to a conference, and so I don't want to push a particular model, but that's why I learned a fair bit. It's called the Parish Collective, so you can go online and look at that. But to me, it means to me it was hard to wrap my brain around loving the city when the city is so big, and so that was overwhelming. When I brought it down to my neighborhood and said, okay, this I can do. So I'm investing my resources, my time, my prayer around a really defined. So to me, that's what parish means. Is so for me, it's where we live, our neighborhood, Rincon Heights. So we've served on the neighborhood association. We are active in the community garden. We donate things to do things. We prayer walk down there. So that's just where we pour ourselves into. So that's ultimately what it means for me, is just to define that space, and then really to say no to some other things and to pour into that place and pray for that place.
That's good.
As a combat veteran, my passion lies with helping the young kids that are coming back with PTSD so they don't end up with my generation homeless. Because I know that a lot of people don't understand what a homeless veteran goes through and why they choose to stay homeless. It's mainly my generation. When we came back and people spit on us and called us baby killers, we don't want nothing to do with anybody anymore. 22 fellow soldiers take their lives every day, most of them homeless. What is being done, or what plans are there to improve the downtown area? But part of it is to make it where these homeless guys aren't the whatever I mean, I've heard so many negative things said about the homeless people. So are there any plans to improve their plight as a form of improving the downtown area?
As I'm hearing it, one of the mayor's biggest wins, and I'm going to pass this on because I can't speak to the specifics, but one of the biggest wins for our city that the mayor has really hooked his hat on the last year or two is how we house and care for our veterans. When it comes to PTSD and homeless, I'm sure that's involved. And so the mayor has really taken this issue to heart. And my guess is Colby or Damon might be able to speak to that more specifically in a few seconds. But this is something that I think is really positive happening downtown.
So I'll just briefly say that when there was kind of the Occupy homeless kind of encampment downtown, that wasn't pretty to look at, but I think it forced the city to really examine that issue and to have that discussion and to start thinking about what we're going to do. And so they did give some serious effort to look at other cities, other models. And one thing that I've seen that there is a Arizona Housing Alliance, and I know the Phoenix branch. Anyway, I've seen some stuff where the concept of rapid rehousing, so to get them into basic housing very quickly. And there's all these other, there's some addiction issues in education and job. There's all these other issues to deal with that we often try to focus on first, but so rapid rehousing, immediately getting them into housing and then doing some stuff. So I know there's people way smarter than me looking at that. But at least I think it's risen to the top of people's radar, and people are starting to engage with that.
Yes, also want to point out, too, one of the big things, too, when we deal with poor Americans and the homeless population is they try to just throw that onto law enforcement and say, just arrest them and put them in jail. And so what we did is we increased recidivism in our county jails for people that should not be there. They should be in a quality, safe place with a roof over their head. One thing we also noticed, I think we were almost up, I believe, like 190 different homeless organizations in our area. And it's strange that we have 190, almost 200 organizations that's supposed to help homelessness, but the homeless population is growing. So there's another question: is that is some of the organizations really trying to solve the problem? Because if they do, then would you really have a job, or do you need to leave a little bit out there so you can keep on working on homelessness? Thirdly, I want to talk about is you can't arrest your way. All homeless people are not bad people. Some of your brilliant minds are out there. And they have had some life blows that made them to be where they are. And I know there's an initiative. I talked with, I think it's my big old cell phone, that there's an initiative right now with the American Council and TPD, is that they're not just going to be arresting, because there's some other problems. We have mental illness out there. We have substance abuse out there. So we need to figure out a way, not just to put them in jail, send them to a drug rehabilitation, send them where they can get some type of mental health help. It's a growing population, and it's a great question to be asked, what we're doing better. But one, we need to look at the 190-some organizations that has a purpose and mission to help that population, and ask the questions: what are their strategies? What's their motives behind that? Is it just to get grant money, to just be out there saying you're doing something, and ask the questions why we're not reducing those numbers like we should? And then also we need to make sure that they're getting the quality care and not just throwing them in jail, because then you're dealing with another problem. You're increasing the county jail recidivism rate. Then you have more poor people have to sit in jail for 7 months because they can't pay a $150 bail.
And that's the next third hour of our conversation. I think we have time for one more question. And
as a leader of a compassion ministry, we often want to reinvest in our community through compassion, and I think the church as a whole has done that fairly well, and that's a burden of the church to deal with the compassion issues of a city. I was taken off guard when I visited Salt Lake a couple years ago that the LDS Church invested $1.5 billion into the revitalization of downtown Salt Lake City. Their belief in their role in the city was evident not just by the compassion ministry that they did, but the money that they invested into the city itself economically. Is there any thought of bringing the church together and looking at the investment of Tucson from an economic standpoint, not just the compassion side that we generally realize it's our responsibility? And I think we have failed. I have failed as a ministry leader to say, I have a responsibility to invest in the economic side of my city, not just the caterpillars, not just the developers that need to come into my city, but the Church of Tucson needs to invest monetarily into the revitalization. Is there a thought and a plan to get us together to think in those strategies?
Yes, but it's in the early stages, I would say, and maybe not just even Tucson, but around the country. Missions organizations are starting to think, we've overlooked our own country, and we've overlooked it by just doing compassion ministry, but not investment and creativity ministry. And so this conversation, this is why I think it's cool that Tucson's talking about what we're talking about now, because we are on the cusp of this conversation of realizing if the church is not creating equitably, then it just picks up the pieces of inequity for the rest of time. And in Tucson, we have an opportunity to figure that out. I'm aware of some conversations of that starting to happen around this idea of self-gentrification, of actual physical financial investment into our talent and our Christian talent, and those in our city that have a God idea and ideal and just need a little help from our churches and ministries to make it happen in our city. But as far as anything super macro, I'm not aware, but I think that's an area that we have the opportunity to innovate. And I'm actually more excited that we don't have it right now than the fact that we do, because that means we can all make it happen. And I just like being on that pioneering end of things anyway. Does anybody have something smarter to say, or because otherwise it'll go back to you.
I'll wade into not smarter than that, but to tie into that, I think that's an excellent point. I think we see some folks downtown. I think of there's I don't know if it's a company, Why I Love Where I Live. There's some creative ventures out there who are believers, who are investing in their community and creating culture, positive things. And those are kind of the ground level of what you're getting to. And I think kind of what Zach often talks about, churches being funders and incubators of startups and those kind of things. I think that's the future model. Ministry in American cities is going to look very different than traditional ministry.
That's it.
It's going to look very different. So I think we have to really think about and be open to trying a lot of different things. So.
That's it.
Yeah.
Huge. We have to close in prayer. That part is fortunate. The closing part is unfortunate, but I wanted to make sure that I clarified that. But there's some questions at your table that might be conversation starters. This time is meant to start conversation, not necessarily solve the whole problem all at once. So please, if you'd like to follow up with these folks, please do so, or talk to someone like Greg that is bringing up these kinds of questions. That would be amazing. I'm really excited about the future of our city. I think we have a city to be proud of, and a city where we can really pioneer some great things for Christ, that in 20 years people look at Tucson and they go, my city needs that, and I can go to Tucson to figure out how to do that and recontextualize it back in my home. That's the city we live in. Colby, if you can share one or two quick stories of something you and Dave and Brian and Mike prayed about, celebrate some of those prayer wins, and then maybe lead us out in a quick 2-minute prayer or so as we close.
So prayer walking that was done probably about 5 years ago or so, and Karen and I had just a small role, and this is really Brian Goodall and Mike Beer and some other guys who were just consistently 3 times a week, every week for a year and a half, praying in and around and for downtown and the city and the U of A and just that whole area, and even beyond, holding National Prayer Day events down there. So there was a lot of stuff that was happening kind of out of sight. Much of the prayer was for God to refurbish, renew, revitalize the area, to bring godly leadership into that, to push out some darkness that was there, to bring more workers into the area. And so we really want to just, a lot of what we're seeing in downtown, we really want to acknowledge God for doing the good work that he's doing there, that people are involved in it, but God is ultimately the one that is allowing that flourishing. And there's still work to do. So there are churches now. We've seen churches plant and meeting in downtown. Those pastors and existing churches and pastors are communicating and connecting and cross-pollinating with each other. So we're seeing that. There are Christian-owned businesses that have started up, and there are Christians who are investing in their businesses in that area, so we're seeing that. Just acknowledging God do that. So I'll pray and we do
Thanks,
that.
Colby.
God, we do come before you and just honor you for your glory, for your blessings, for your faithfulness, God, that you have watched over our city, guided us, protected us, allowed your grace to flow freely across all of our city, believers and unbelievers. God, as we watch our city and our churches come together to work for our city, help us to always look to you for wisdom, for guidance. We ask for your protection spiritually, that you will push out the dark forces that are there, that want to derail this process, or your church, derail justice in our city, peace, shalom. God, help us to be humble, to seek after you in each step that we take in this area. And we just fall before you and ask for your blessings on our city. We thank you that we get to participate in that you have a role for each of us, that we get to witness this happen. What an amazing blessing that is. Thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Can we give God a hand?
Yeah.
This was awesome, was it not? One more Thanksgiving to God.